People love to remember their wedding day as if it were the brightest moment of their lives, as if the morning began with the ringing voices of loved ones, the smell of freshly brewed coffee and laughter reflected in the sunbeams on the walls, and as if every detail there was woven from love and serene happiness. And I also wanted to believe that when my day came, it would be exactly like that, warm and bright, like a memory that you return to in the most difficult moments to warm yourself from the inside. I imagined how I would wake up not from silence, but from my mother gently stroking my head, tousling my hair, as she did when I was little, and my father, grumbling, would say something about how I grew up too fast, and my younger brother Adam, as always, would start letting go of his endless jokes to relieve tension and make me laugh, even if I was shaking with excitement. But that morning, my wedding day, was not as I had ever pictured it in my dreams. I opened my eyes to a house that seemed emptier than ever before, and though the sun, as it should on such an important day, filtered through the thin lace curtains of my old bedroom in Charleston, South Carolina, and spread across the floor in streaks of gold, there was no sense of celebration inside me. The air was filled with the scent of gardenias and roses, the same flowers my mother adored and which now seemed to stand in every room, turning the house into a flower trap. But the smell only emphasized the absence of those who should have been there. I closed my eyes, imagining what it must have been like. The rush, the ringing laughter, the footsteps to and fro, the bustle of everyone hovering around me, helping with the preparations, and me in the center of it all, smiling and slightly confused. But when I listened more closely, it became clear. The house was plunged into an unnatural silence, echoing and heavy. I threw my robe over my shoulders and walked down the hallway, as if clinging to the hope that I would find my parents in the kitchen, hear my father turn on his old radio, how it mumbles the news or plays old songs, and maybe find Adam with his eternal habit of stealing cookies before breakfast. But everything turned out differently. There was not a single sound in the kitchen, not a single trace of life, only impeccable cleanliness, even a little excessive for such a day, when chaos usually reigns. Everything looked as if the owners of the house had simply disappeared, leaving behind a sterile space. And then I noticed it. The only thing on the table, a white envelope with my name written in a handwriting that I would recognize among 1,000. It was my mother's neat, intricate inscription. My chest tightened, and my stomach responded with a dull ache when I touched the envelope, feeling the cold marble countertop under my fingers. I was still trying to convince myself that this was some touching wedding tradition that I just didn't know about. A letter with wise words of advice, maybe even wishes for happiness, something that my mother wanted my new life to begin with. But as soon as I tore the envelope open and took out the note, I realized how cruelly mistaken I was. There were only a few words in it, short as a shot. "We'll see how you'll behave with the guests when we're not at your wedding." That's all. No wishes, no advice, not even a signature. I reread those words over and over again, and each time they seemed to cut me from the inside. My hands began to shake, the lines swam before my eyes, and my heart pounded so hard that I seemed to hear it pounding in my ears. I tried to deny the obvious, clinging to the idea that this was a ridiculous joke, that my parents would burst out of the pantry with Adam and everyone would start laughing, accusing me of panicking too easily. But there was no laughter, no whispers behind the door, only silence, echoing and still, heavy as stone. I sat down at the kitchen table, still clutching the letter, and let the silence envelop me like a black blanket. And then I remembered how many times I had imagined this day, and never once in those dreams had I imagined myself meeting it all alone. Perhaps I should have foreseen this development, because my parents had never hidden their feelings about William, my fiancé. They always said that he was the wrong man, that his family was too distant from ours, too rich, too alien, too wrong for the life they thought right for me. I thought that when the big day came, they would swallow their pride, show up like parents should, support me even if they weren't happy. I believed that deep down they would still be there, but it turned out I was wrong. They really were gone. They were gone on the very day I needed them the most. The next hours dragged on as if I were moving through a thick fog where every minute lost its shape, and every now and then I caught myself mindlessly pacing from room to room, opening and closing doors, checking my phone as if the outcome of the day depended on it, as if a message or a missed call was about to appear on the screen, that this was all a mistake, that my family would change their minds, come back, hug me, and say that they couldn't leave me at such a moment. But instead of the long-awaited call, I saw only traces of their absence, this gaping emptiness that was reflected in everything I touched. Our living room, which always seemed to be the center of the house, where voices thundered, where endless conversations and arguments took place, looked dead that day. My mother's embroidered pillows were too neatly laid out, as if they were specially laid out for display, and family photographs on the mantelpiece were lined up in a row, looking at me from the past, and this cold order only made me feel worse. I sat down on one sofa, then on a chair in the corner, got up, wandered around the house again, and caught myself seeing not objects, but reminders of what was no longer there and perhaps never to be. Everything around seemed to whisper, "You are left alone." And at that moment, it seemed as if the walls of the house where I grew up were squeezing me, crushing me, turning each room into a museum of memory where I was the only remaining exhibit. As dawn broke and morning finally came into its own, the first guests began to arrive at the house. Friends, distant relatives, neighbors, and each of their steps on the porch echoed in me like a bell. It took my best friend Grace 1 second to notice that something was wrong. She found me sitting on the stairs. I was clutching that ill-fated letter tightly in my hands and staring somewhere into the emptiness, into the space that was absorbing me. She didn't ask anything, didn't demand an explanation. She just sat down next to me and put her arm around me, and that was enough to keep me from falling apart right there. "You're stronger than you think," she said quietly, her voice soft but firm, "and you don't need anyone's permission to be happy." I listened to her, tried to cling to these words, but everything inside seemed to go dead, because every new knock on the door, every voice that rang out in the hallway, still brought me back to the same thing, to those who were not there. I continued to expect that at any moment I would see my father appear in the door, tall with his usual restraint, how my mother would adjust another hat on herself, how Adam would wink conspiratorially at me. But instead, I knew that at that moment, they were thousands of miles away in Paris, and probably sitting in some cafe on the corner, drinking coffee and pretending that this day meant nothing to them. The pain in my chest was such that I wanted to scream, but I clenched my teeth and forced myself to move on, because the wedding would not stop for the sake of my sadness. Grace helped me into the dress, her confident hands quickly handling the buttons and fastenings, and I clutched the fabric with my fingers and tried not to cry. She chattered incessantly, sometimes telling silly stories, sometimes mentioning the weather, sometimes making deliberate jokes. "So, are you marrying a millionaire, my girl?" she said with a sly smile, adjusting my veil. "If your parents saw you now, they would bite their elbows in shame." I nodded, trying to believe her words. But deep down, I knew. There was no regret there in Paris. When I stopped at the top of the stairs, already completely prepared, in a dress that shone with whiteness and the weight of the moment, I looked down into the backyard, where guests were gradually trickling in. There were my friends from college, distant relatives whose names I barely remembered, and William's family from Chicago, all dressed in their finest, animated and happy. And in that moment, I knew for sure, for the first time in my life, I would have to face the world completely alone. There were no parents to guide me, no brother to make me laugh and lighten the mood. There was only me. And yet, as I stepped into the aisle, I suddenly felt calm. Maybe it was the sunlight filtering through the leaves, or the scent of roses that filled the air. Or maybe it was the first time I truly realized that I could cope, that even if my family had chosen Paris over my wedding, I could still choose happiness. Looking back now, that letter was a turning point. It hurt, but it was also freeing, because sometimes the hardest blows force us to grow, to become stronger. And when I took William's hand, when I said my vows and promised to build a new life with him, I felt ready, no matter who turned away. By midday, our house was already full of sounds, loud laughter of guests carried through the open windows, heels clicking on the porch, waiters scurrying around the foyer with trays where glasses of champagne clinked and collided. Everything around was seething with joy and anticipation, but inside I felt a strange, sticky emptiness, as if I were standing somewhere apart. I went up to my old bedroom, wrapped in satin and lace, and stared at my reflection in the mirror for a long time, trying to figure out who this woman in front of me was, a bride, a daughter, or just a person who had to be born again today. My wedding dress shimmered in the morning light as if the fabric itself was breathing along with me. But in the reflection of the mirror, I saw a girl who looked scared and a little lost, as if someone else's life had been put on her along with this satin and lace. Grace, as always, was there. She never left my side for more than a minute, rushing around the room, now adjusting my hair, now straightening the necklace on my neck, now fluffing up the light veil, and all this with some incredible ease, as if she had a secret gift to turn chaos into order. From time to time, she made such jokes that I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. For example, she giggled, "If you suddenly trip on this long train, just pretend that it's a new dance step. Believe me, no one will notice." Or with a sly smile, she said, "Well, who needs parents when you're entering the family of a millionaire?" And I understood that her chatter was a life preserver, pulling me to the surface when I myself wanted to choke in the void. I knew she was saying this for my own good, and her good intentions were filtering through my pain, lifting my spirits a little. But there was still a gaping hole deep in my chest, an emptiness that echoed with every breath I took. The house was filled with people, but not my people, not the people who should have been there by right, and that made the noise and laughter feel especially foreign. I forced myself to take a deep breath, as if I were holding Grace and asking her for strength, and I told myself to smile, even if it was a forced smile, because it was time to greet the guests and pretend that everything was going as it should. When I came downstairs, I hardly recognized my own house. The banisters of the stairs were decorated with white and gold ribbons. Bouquets of white roses and lilies of the valley stood in every vase, turning the rooms into a flower garden, and the large front window was wide open, letting in a warm breeze from the garden and the distant laughter of children running through the grass. I found myself wondering if my parents had imagined my wedding like this when they thought of me, of the future, or if it was easier for them to think of Paris than of my joy. William's family had already arrived, and they felt as if the house belonged to them. His mother, Charlotte Turner, strode through the rooms as if she were a queen, her dress billowing behind her, and the diamonds on her neck and ears flashed so brightly with every movement that I couldn't help but look away, because I had only ever seen such stones in a museum. She smiled at each guest with her confident, polished smile, her voice soft and velvety when she complimented them, and people melted before her charm. William's father, Henry Turner, pulled up in a limousine so long it barely fit in the driveway, and when he got out, his laughter was so infectious that even passers-by turned to look. I watched him tip the driver a bill that looked suspiciously like $100, and the movement seemed so natural to him, as if generosity were part of his body. And watching him, I felt tiny, like a schoolgirl in the company of giants, and completely out of place. And yet I was struck by their warmth. Charlotte came up to me, took my hands in hers, and said, "Darling, you're shining today. You're part of our family already." And there was so much sincerity in her words that my eyes stung. Henry hugged me the way fathers hug their daughters, and quietly whispered, "Don't worry, this day is just for you and William." Their care and concern calmed me for a moment, and I caught myself thinking that they were giving me what I didn't get from my parents, the feeling that I was important, that I was accepted. But at the same time, their kindness exposed the absence of my own family even more, as if a tooth was missing from a perfect smile. And it was on this empty spot that all eyes focused. By evening, the house was packed, a seemingly endless stream of guests, college friends, distant relatives I barely recognized, William's Chicago colleagues in expensive suits, their elegant wives with impeccable hair and sparkling eyes. In every room, I caught snatches of conversation, discussing business trips to London, arguing about where to buy a summer home, laughing at stories about old money and the traditions of Chicago's Gold Coast. One guest even mentioned in passing that the William family owned half a block of Michigan Avenue, and at that moment, I glanced automatically at my plain wedding ring and felt a wave of shame, as if all my things, all that I was, were too small and insignificant next to their world. I forced myself to be busy, meeting new people, accepting congratulations, smiling and introducing Grace to anyone who would listen, as if I were introducing her to a new world along with me. But inside, I felt like I was balancing on the edge all the time, between who I was and who these shining people wanted me to be. She loved it all. She moved among the guests with such confidence and ease, as if she had known them for many years, and every laugh, every turn of her head said that she already felt like a part of their world. But I kept reaching out to the window with my gaze, as if to a life preserver, looking for that face that never appeared. Every time another car drove up to the house, my heart sank, jumped in my chest, as if now I would see my mother, father, or Adam. But a moment later, it fell back, heavily and resoundingly, when it turned out that this was just another distant relative or business partner of William's family, with a perfect smile and an overly loud voice. And then, finally, the moment came that I was both afraid and waiting for, the time of the ceremony. Our living room, which only yesterday had seemed like my childhood living room, was now a shining fairy tale chapel with neat rows of white chairs, light pouring through the windows onto the polished wooden floor, and an archway of ivy and white lilies in the distance, beneath which I would say my vows. I could see a camera crew in the corner, their bright lights shining in my eyes, making it all the more surreal, as if I was inside someone else's movie. William's family, it turned out, were not good at doing things by halves. They had even invited the local news to cover the wedding of their only son. I found myself thinking that I had never been on television in my life, and there was no turning back now. Grace gave my hand one last firm squeeze, her palm warm and firm, and whispered in my ear, "You're ready. And you look like $1 million." I laughed involuntarily, and the laughter that escaped me was like the first breath of air after a long dive, because for the first time all day, I felt a glimmer of real excitement, even joy. Maybe, just maybe, this day could still be mine. The music began to play softly, the piano quietly and softly filling the room, not too loud, but just enough for my heart to start beating in rhythm with the melody. I took a step forward and entered the living room. All eyes were on me at once. The flashes of cameras were blinding, but the silence of the crowd was so thick and soft that I felt like I was walking in a cocoon where I could only hear my own breathing. William was waiting for me ahead, his eyes glowing with warmth and some kind of quiet promise. And he looked at me in a way no one had ever looked at me, as if I were the only person in the world. I felt the ache in my chest, the crushing emptiness, ease a little. And as I moved toward him, I allowed myself to forget about the letter, about Paris, about all the empty chairs in the room that should have belonged to my family. I focused only on William's smile, on his voice shaking with emotion as he whispered, "You're here." And those two words took my breath away. The priest's words seemed to reach me from far away. The crowd dissolved in golden light. And in that moment, when it was time to say, "I do," I heard my own voice. It was strong, even, clear, and my heart was pure. The cameras clicked, the guests held their breath, and somewhere far away, across the ocean, maybe in a Parisian cafe, I imagined my parents looking at the screen and seeing a daughter who was stronger, braver, and happier than they ever thought. The applause that followed the priest's words was thunder that rolled through the room. William kissed me, and for a moment all the loneliness was gone, dissolved, and I was surrounded by people who truly cared about me, even if they weren't the ones I'd dreamed of my whole life. The film crew didn't miss a single moment. Our first dance, our laughter, the way Charlotte and Henry hugged me tight and warm, as if I were already their own daughter. The world watched me enter a new life, and only I knew that inside myself I had quietly and finally closed the door to the old one. Late in the evening, when the music had died down and the guests were leaving, the house was gradually emptying, and I went out into the garden alone. Above me, the black sky, strewn with stars, stretched out, and I stood under them, allowing myself to finally feel everything at once: the pain of betrayal, the joy of a new beginning, the strange but sweet feeling of freedom. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but when I looked up and saw the huge moon rising over our garden and over my new family, I suddenly realized that I was ready for whatever happened next. After the last dance, when the musicians were already putting away their instruments, after the last applause that echoed through the house and dissolved somewhere in the warm air, after the champagne lost its cheerful bubbles and turned into a bland, sweetish liquid at the bottom of the glasses, and after the sun finally hid behind the old trees in the garden, I was finally able to distance myself from all this endless bustle of the celebration. My new husband, my William, was still outside next to his parents, and I heard his loud, booming laughter when he and his father recounted some absurd moment from the toasts. And this sound seemed to me at the same time affectionate and alien. Grace, as always, was nearby, but even her omnipresent care was replaced by fatigue. She helped the last guests find their coats and handbags. Her voice sounded soft and warm, as if she were the hostess of this evening and not me. And for the first time that day, I felt truly alone. The wedding whirlwind that had been swirling around me since the morning suddenly died down, turning into a distant hum somewhere in the background. I quietly, almost on tiptoe, went upstairs, where silence awaited, and entered my old bedroom. The room greeted me as if time had stood still here. The same soft pink wallpaper that I once hated for being too girly. The same shelf loaded with paperbacks that I dragged with me from the library. The same small lamp on the nightstand, casting a golden circle of light on the bedspread, as if trying to remind me, all this is still yours, as if nothing had changed. And it was strange to find myself again in this childish world after all the solemn vows, promises of eternal fidelity, and kisses under the flashes of cameras. My dress was a little wrinkled. The tight corset was pressing against my chest. My legs were aching from the heels, but I was in no hurry to undress. I just sat on the bed and closed my eyes, listening to my own breathing, which was evening out after all these hours of smiling and talking. Only then did I remember the phone, forgotten during all this chaos. When I picked it up from the bedside table, it vibrated so hard that I almost dropped it from my hands. The screen lit up, and the numbers I saw seemed unreal to me. 420 missed calls, a number so huge that it made no sense, as if it were just a system error or someone's evil joke. But it was true. One after another, the calls came in a long stream, all from my parents and Adam. And not only calls, voice messages, dozens of texts, emails written in capital letters, like a scream breaking through the screen. Where are you? Call us now. Are you okay? Answer the phone. At first, I just sat there, staring at that glowing rectangle, feeling the past literally crashing back into my life. It was pounding on the door, ringing, knocking, nagging. I scrolled through the notifications, watching them pile up like a digital avalanche, washing over me, and there was something painfully ironic about it. The family who couldn't come to my wedding, who chose Paris instead, were suddenly able to show up on my phone with hundreds of messages, over and over again, as if they had the right to drag me back. Curiosity got the better of me. With a trembling finger, I opened the first voicemail and braced myself for whatever they had to say. My mother's voice came through, harsh and raspy, as if she'd been screaming all day. "You have to call us back right now. We saw the wedding. We saw it on TV. How could you not tell us it would be like this?" I blinked, feeling a strange mixed feeling rise up inside me, something between rage and weariness. The next message, my father's voice, dry and rough. "You know, this isn't funny. Why are you ignoring us? Are you going to just abandon your family like that?" I gritted my teeth, listening to that tone, familiar from childhood, that voice that always sounded more like an order than a concern. The messages came one after another, each a mixture of accusations, confusion, anger. And then suddenly, there were quieter, almost desperate ones. And then Adam's voice, soft, calm, quieter than I remembered. "Hi, sis. I just saw you on TV. You looked amazing. I thought it would be a boring wedding, but you looked like a movie star." For a second, I almost laughed out loud. Of course, only Adam could see the beauty at a moment like that, not the bitterness, not the emptiness. Only he could see what was important, even when everything was falling apart. I closed my eyes and imagined the three of them, sitting somewhere in a Parisian hotel room, fussily switching channels until they suddenly came across the broadcast of my wedding. I imagined my mother's eyes widening when she recognized my dress, my father's distrustful leaning forward, his brow furrowed, and Adam's signature smile, proud and slightly lazy. The irony was too obvious, almost comical. They hadn't believed me when I told them William's family was something serious, something real. And now they saw it on the TV screen, and it seemed to shake them more than my letter ever could. They had always thought I was exaggerating when I said that life with William was something more than just another love or beautiful promises. Or worse, they thought that I was just trying to impress them, to make myself look better than I was. But now, when their eyes fell on the TV screen, when they heard the name Turner, saw the glitter of the jewels on Charlotte's neck, Henry's booming laughter, the glittering guests, and the live broadcast from Chicago's Gold Coast, they finally realized how wrong they had been, and perhaps for the first time in their lives realized how much they had missed by refusing to be there. But listening to their messages one after another, I didn't feel the softness in my chest and the desire to forgive that I had before. No, I felt something crystallize inside me, gaining a solid form and incredible clarity. My whole life I had lived as if I had to earn their approval, as if my breathing, my smile, even my choice of clothes or books depended on their looks and words. I had changed my clothes to look more decent than I wanted, changed my speech to sound the way they expected, changed even my dreams to fit the picture my parents had painted for me. And yet, in the end, it had all been pointless, because when my real day came, when it was my turn to be in charge, they chose Paris, not me. Now, hours after the vows, they were trying to squeeze back into my life, to get back into my story, but I no longer owed them. I didn't have to explain. I didn't have to answer. I put the phone down on the bed and let the last message play out. It was Adam's voice, his words soft and quiet. "Just call me, okay? I miss you." I closed my eyes and let those words wash over me, and for a brief moment I almost broke, almost grabbed the phone to hear his voice in person, to tell him that I was okay, that I missed him too, that he still meant something to me. But something stopped me. It wasn't anger anymore. It had long since burned out, like a fire after a storm. It was a feeling of freedom. For the first time in my life, I realized that my happiness was no longer tied to their approval. I didn't have to justify myself to them or beg for forgiveness for simply living the way I wanted. This life was finally mine, and mine alone, not theirs to judge or break or control. In truth, my wedding showed me the true face of family, something I had always missed. William's parents welcomed me as if I had long been a part of their home. Their kindness demanded nothing in return. It was warm, simple, genuine. Grace was with me every second, holding my hand when I was down, catching me when I was falling apart. Even the guests, many of whom I barely knew by name, celebrated me, looked at me with joy and warmth that I had never felt from my parents. I remembered the moment when I walked down the aisle. The flashes of cameras were blinding, the music was a soft ring around me, and a feeling grew in my chest that I was not alone. I felt seen, as if the world finally noticed me, appreciated me, and most importantly, loved me. And maybe that was what I had always been missing. Maybe that was all I needed. I left my phone face down on the dresser for the rest of the night. Every few minutes it would vibrate again. Another call, another message, another desperate reminder of the past. But I ignored them all. I let myself walk barefoot into the backyard, where the grass was cool and damp with the evening dew. And there, William found me. He came quietly, put his arms around me from behind, rested his chin on my shoulder, and his breath warmed my skin. "Are you okay?" he asked, so softly that I didn't have to pretend. I nodded, and the answer was simple and true. Yes. Yes, later, as we drove away from the house that had been my home all my life, and which was now, strangely, our home for just this one day, I felt an incredible lightness. The road before us stretched into darkness, and somewhere in the distance the city lights flickered, like an invitation to a new life. I didn't know what would happen next, didn't know if my parents would ever understand my choice or if they would stay on the other side forever. But I knew one thing for sure. I would not go back. I had found my place, my voice, my life, and for the first time in so many years, that was enough. 3 years can fly by without you even noticing or stretch out to infinity. It all depends on where you are and who you are with. For me, those 3 years after the wedding were like a storm and a calm, fast and slow at the same time, sometimes exhausting and sometimes so sweet that I wanted to hug every minute to my heart and never let go. Looking back on that day, I can hardly recognize in myself the woman who sat alone in her childhood bedroom, clutching a cold letter in her hand and thinking that maybe she would never be whole again, that the crack in her heart would remain forever, and that her life from now on would be built on the fragments. Today I live in a completely different world, and sometimes when I catch my reflection in the window of our house on the shore of Lake Michigan, I even laugh. Laugh at the fact that I once doubted whether I deserved to be happy. Our house north of Chicago has become for me not just a place where I sleep and wake up, but the embodiment of the dream that I carried inside me all my life and hid in the deepest drawers of memory, afraid to admit even to myself that I wanted it. The walls are painted in soft colors that seem to embrace you when you walk inside, and wide windows open up to the endless blue water, and every morning begins with this quiet miracle when the light falls right on the floor and makes the house look like a postcard. Our kitchen is so big that you can dance in it, and often I do just that, barefoot with a cup of coffee in my hand, inhaling the aroma of freshly baked bread. Sometimes in the golden light of the evening, I catch a glimpse of myself in the glass, my hair a little disheveled, my face tired but happy, and I can hardly believe that all this is mine. William still works in the family real estate business. His days are full of meetings, calls, endless deals. But every evening he comes home, and his first gesture is always the same. He hugs me so tightly that all the noise and the whole world ceases to exist. He is still the same gentle and calm man who held my hand at the altar, but now he has become my best friend, my partner in every day, in every little thing. We spend Sundays lazily sitting on the back porch with books, or wrapped in warm scarves, walking along the lake in winter, when the wind cuts our faces and the cold stings our cheeks, and the world narrows to the two of us, to the sound of our steps and breathing. Sometimes I wonder if my parents remember me, if they regret choosing silence over presence, and if they feel the pain of absence that I sometimes feel in silence. For 3 years, we didn't say a word. Not a call, not a letter, not even a short card from Adam on my birthday. At first, this emptiness seemed impossible, as if I had deprived myself of air, as if the weight of their silence was pressing right into my chest. But over time, I learned to let go, learned to breathe without them, learned to build my life so that there would be no holes left in it from someone else's choices. I realized that I could not forever drag their decision to turn away on me, that I could not fill the void they left with hopes that would never come true. So I decided to create something of my own. A few months after the wedding, William's parents gave us $50,000. "Your dreams," Charlotte said, and her eyes were so warm and proud at that moment that I couldn't hold back the tears. I couldn't even imagine that I would ever have such freedom, such an opportunity. The world suddenly opened up to me as never before, and for the first time in my life, I decided to do something just for myself, not for someone else, not for approval, but for my own breath. And so my bakery was born. I pitched the idea to Grace first. We were sitting at the kitchen table, mugs of tea steaming between us, and I was scribbling a plan on the back of an old envelope, as if I was afraid it would be too bold to write on real paper. Grace looked at me in that way that only she can, her eyes shining, and she smiled. "Let's do it. Let's create something beautiful." We used the money to rent a tiny space in Evanston, bright, with high ceilings and brick walls, big windows that looked out onto the street. We painted the walls the color of sunflowers, bright and sunny, a reminder that even on cloudy days there's light to be found. We called it Lakeview Bakery. The first months were like a crazy dream. Flour and sugar flew through the air like snowflakes, laughter alternated with fatigue, and our hearts either skipped a beat with joy or sank into our heels with fear. We got up before dawn, kneaded dough, made icing, and learned to run a business at the same time, making one mistake after another. There were sleepless nights, burnt loaves and forgotten orders, and tears right by the oven. But we kept moving forward. Neighbors dropped in to try our baked goods, then brought friends, and soon a constant stream of people began to flow through the threshold of Lakeview Bakery. Families with children, students who took pies to go, even tourists from Chicago found their way to us, and I caught myself thinking that here it is, a real miracle created by my hands. There is something special, almost indescribable, about the quiet pride that awakens inside you when you create something with your own hands, when your fingers, covered in flour, transform ordinary ingredients into bread that someone will share with their family at breakfast, or into a tray of cookies that someone will bring to the evening tea, or into a bouquet of cupcakes decorated with cream so that they become little celebrations in themselves. Each loaf, each baking sheet, each batch of cakes seemed to me not just a pastry, but a small victory, proof that I can build and not destroy, that I can give something good to the world, even if it is so simple. Grace and I experimented endlessly, trying new recipes, arguing, laughing, sometimes fighting, but always celebrating every milestone. Our first 5-star review, the first line out the door in the morning, the first day we finally broke even and realized we could breathe easier. That Saturday when the numbers first came together was so lively that I can still remember the taste of exhaustion and laughter that evening. We ran like crazy until we collapsed in the back room on sacks of flour, tired to the point of shaking legs, hair in tangled buns, arms aching and still laughing so hard the tears ran down our faces. The bakery was no longer just a business. It became a place where people came not just for bread, but for warmth, for a smile, for an atmosphere. Strangers became friends. The laughter spilled out the door onto the sidewalk as if the building itself were beginning to glow. Families would come every Saturday just for our cinnamon rolls. Old people would sit at the table by the window, spread out newspapers, and stay until noon. Little ones would press their noses to the glass, fascinated, watching us frost the cakes, and would clap their hands if I winked at them. I knew every name, every favorite order, every little story woven into the life of this bakery. In a strange but very real sense, I had found a family here, not the kind bound by blood and obligation, but the kind built on kindness and shared moments. Grace had long since ceased to be just a business partner to me. She had become the sister I never had. She knew how to make me laugh when I was exhausted, how to calm me when I was nervous, and how to make even the smallest victories a celebration. We still laugh about that letter my mother wrote, telling me I would fail without their support. "If only they could see you now," Grace says, and there's that glint in her eyes that makes me want to cry and laugh at the same time. I just smile and shake my head because I think, if they really could see me now, maybe they would understand. Or maybe they wouldn't, but it doesn't matter anymore. Of course, there are days when the past catches up with me. Birthdays, when instead of my parents calling, all I hear is the laughter of the neighbors in the bakery. Christmases, when the smell of cinnamon reminds me of my childhood home. Or a random song on the radio that suddenly tugs at my chest so hard I have to close my eyes and take a deep breath. Some evenings when I'm alone and the hum of the city has died down, I find myself wondering what my parents are doing now, whether they're thinking about me, whether Adam is telling someone in Paris that he has a sister across the ocean. But these moments are rare now, and most importantly, they no longer cut the heart as they once did. Time can smooth out even the sharpest edges, and I have managed to fill the voids in my life with love, meaning, and a cause that grows and breathes with me. I am telling you all this not because I am still bitter, but because I want each of you to know that healing is possible, that even the deepest wounds heal if you give them time, patience, and a little faith. To live a good life, you do not need universal approval. You do not need to chase the recognition of those who refuse to see value in you. Sometimes the family you choose turns out to be much better than the one you were born into. So if you ever find yourself with a letter in your hands and it seems to you like the end, remember, it can be the beginning of something beautiful. Sometimes the best chapters begin where you least expect, and happiness. Happiness often finds you not in the places you look for it, but in the places you make it, day after day, loaf after loaf, laugh after laugh, with the people who choose to stick around. And if you ever find yourself in Evanston and stop by Lake View, you'll find me behind the counter, covered in flour from head to toe, with my hair all messed up and a big smile on my face. I'll hand you a loaf of bread that's still warm, put it in your hands, and wish you well. Because in the end, every story, even the most painful and heartbreaking, deserves a sweet aftertaste.